Hey everyone, welcome to Pankration Now, the ongoing episodes for and the one stop for martial arts, pankration, fitness, and life in general. Uh, we're approaching the Christmas holidays now. This is, I think, the 9th of December, and we're almost there, man. The year has gone like by, and it's insane. I mean, when did school start, and when was the when was Thanksgiving, and now we're approaching the doorstep of Christmas. Man, time is just flying. I'm Aris Makris, and I'm the owner and the founder of the SPARTAN Pankration Academy, which houses ARMAK Pankration. I'm going to be solo. My co-host, the kid George Gio, is away on business. So for the next couple of episodes, it's going to be just me and you. And I wanted to talk about a couple of things. I mean, we did cover some of the stuff on pankration in terms of the differences between pankration and MMA on the last episode, and I wanted to pick up on that because I was on a discussion on Facebook on a post that a legend and one of my all-time favorite fighters. I've got two all-time favorite fighters and guys who I think would be the epitome, the embodiment of pankration today, and that's Randy Couture and Boss Rutten. And I was on a post that Boss had put in on his Facebook page, on an article that stated that pankration should be put back into the Olympics, and which I'm totally for it. And we just found out that Thai boxing, Muay Thai, will be put in as a show sport. That's how FILA introduces new eligible sports, Olympic sports, and so is cheerleading. So, and nothing against the cheerleaders, man. I mean, I've seen what it's turned into today, and I take it back. I mean, nothing to it. I don't mean anything by the laughing. It's just, putting them together side by side is an awkward scenario, to say the least. I've seen what cheerleading has turned into, and it is a completely athletic event. I mean, hey, if they can put in ballroom dancing, they can put in cheerleading, right? So, and I think cheerleading is a much more athletic sport. I mean, you got a lot of gymnastics happening there, as opposed to ballroom dancing, So, well, if they can put ballroom dancing, I think they can also put in Greek dancing and maybe Irish dancing too. That's another topic in itself. So I was on the post, and we were commenting back and forth with a couple of people, and I wanted to take the opportunity today to address the issue of there was a topic that was raised within that post, and just to mention, I'd like to have eventually, hopefully, I'll have Boss on our podcast. I think he's a unique individual. He's very outspoken and a very, to me, I think these are the guy. This is the guy that is, an ambassador to the sport of pankration. He is one of the first Pankratiasts, world champion Pankratiasts, out of the Pancrase tournaments in Japan, who actually, brought it to the forefront. And he's an admirer of pankration, and I think, to me, he embodies, for many, many reasons, different reasons, that of Randy. He embodies what a Pankratiast, what an exemplary Pankratiast would be like. To me, a Pankratiast, is a complete individual, not one that relies strictly on grappling or strictly on striking. But Pankratiasts in the ancient days were revered as tremendous, ferocious strikers. And here's where the topic was that we were going back and forth with a couple of the people on there that I think were misconstrued based on the information that they lack in terms of historical knowledge and in comparison to today's MMA. And one of them was, the topic was, and I have it dotted down over here, how would a present day top tier MMA fighter fare against an ancient Pankratiast? One of the guys said, one of the comments up there was, according to today's advancements in fighting and blah blah blah, a top tier guy today would would tear apart a especially in strength and size as well, if you want to consider steroid use, and even that wouldn't help. They would probably tear apart an ancient Pankratiast. And I had to interject, which I usually don't interject in, and I don't debate on Facebook. I rarely do. My opinions are my opinions, and that's not a platform to have a debate. I mean, you're basically commenting with people that might or might not have experience, and most of the time they don't have that much experience. And what comments and opinions they have is based on what they know and what they see in front of them, what has been presented to them in the last 20 years since the UFC has been around. And that's a huge topic in itself. But I did interject, and I wanted to clarify some stuff, but it's not the platform, like I said, to comment on, because people can sit there and they give their opinions, and as far as opinions are concerned, they're like an a-hole. Everybody's got one. Does that make an opinion valid? Just because it's my opinion? Absolutely not. Or his opinion? Absolutely not. But on a fact-based opinion that is rooted on in research and study is completely different, right? And I mean, people know me as an authority of pankration worldwide. I'm going to jump off topic here and there, so bear with me. It's just my ADD and HDD kicking in most of the time, but I do get back to my point. People do recognize me as an authority, or the authority on pankration, given the amount of the documentaries I've done, on the History Channel. And I mean, the work that I have done to spread pankration out, and popularize it. But we don't give enough credit to the guys that actually, caused me to get out, and delve deeper into it. Guys like Jim Arvanites, who, although he might not be active today or as active as he was before, he was the man that actually brought it out. And had it not been for him, had it not been for other resources that led me to him, I would not be in the position I am today. And I would not have acquired the passion that I have for it, had it not been for him. And he's just one of the guys, and it's unfortunate that he doesn't get as much credit today as he should. But that's another story in itself. And then you have the I myself have been involved in it and still involved in it most of my adult life. And I'd say all of my adult life. There are other people out there that have been promoting it, like Matt Hume and Bas Rutten, who basically who's a pancreas champion. And the reason why they used pancreas is because the Japanese didn't want to use pankration because it was a Greek term, so they used pancreas instead. And this is an excellent individual and a great example of what a Pankratiast should look like. I mean, he's an immense striker. Pankratiasts were known to be ferocious, lethal strikers. And it was based on the way that they trained back then. Well, while they were great grapplers as well, but they weren't grapplers and they weren't strikers, they were Pankratiasts. And that's how the Greeks termed them back then. Okay, so now to get back onto topic as to, whether a present day top tier MMA fighter would beat an ancient Pankratiast. In my opinion, based on facts based on how their training methods, and based on their perspective of fighting, absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. It's one thing to have athleticism. It's one thing to be a great athlete and a great sport fighter, but when you start employing and based and on that topic in the comments that were in there, it was a comparison, and I think they made the comparison one individual made the comparison based on a ruling system. Now, we're talking about top fighters here, bar none, with no rules. We're not talking about rules, because if we start throwing rules into the mix over here, oh well, then we can minimize we can limit and minimize the abilities of anybody to be able to fight. So, for example, you take what Fight Championship used to be, where you can soccer kick, and what is one fight championship today, where you can sit on the, you can soccer kick a guy while on the floor. I mean, any type of kick goes, any knee goes, elbowing from 12 to 6, coming down. The first UFC, for example, first couple of UFCs. Compared to today, with the enormous amount of rules put in there, well, go back to Pride and then look at UFC, and you'll see why so many Pride fighters had a hard time in the UFCs, because a lot of rules were implemented in there, and tactics and strategies were taken away from those fighters, where it didn't cater to the guy that was grappling. So the guy was on the ground, the guy could take kicks on the, he would be able, the guy standing would be able to kick the guy that's on the ground. He'd be able to, use an array of different strategies to work his abilities, right? And to work his, his tactics and his weaponry according to what he thinks, what suited him. Now, once you start embedding too many rules in there, and you're caught in with a ruling system that limits you this, limits you that, limits you here, well, then by that in itself, you can take the greatest fighter in the world, you can bring the greatest, ancient Pankratiast back, and he would probably object. I still think he would beat the living daylights out of any top tier guy here today, And now, how do we compare these two? Well, number one, and this is what my objection was on the post, where I interjected. A guy was going, well, based on the ruling system today, and some other guy said, well, these guys today are much bigger and stronger than this. I really don't think these guys have done any research whatsoever in terms of history. So they're just basically blowing smoke out of their anal cavity. And it's unfortunate that these type of opinions go on to the typical layman, a typical regular Joe Blow who doesn't know very much and only sees what he sees on UFC, and this is by what they get educated, and this is their form of education, is what they see on the UFC and what they hear everybody else comment on, right? But they don't examine the facts to distinguish between one and the other, to see, well, where are the differences, right? Well, let's go back to let's compare the ancient Pankratiast, okay? And what were they like? Well, number one, there were no weight categories to begin with, so that what made them. Why I believe they would they would, without a doubt, dominate the entire MMA market today. It's too bad we can't bring somebody from the past and bring him up over here and just, and let him do his thing. The Pankratiasts were brutal back in the day. They were extremely brutal in the way that they attacked. They were savages. Don't forget, this was a warring people, right? The ancient Greeks and most cultures, the Romans, the ancient Greeks, those people, those races of old, these were warring factions, and this is all mano a mano, so it was a completely different mentality. And it was one that was forced upon you to engage in finding ways to beat your opponent mano a mano, face to face, because you were putting steel in the person, right? So there was certain protocol that had to be taken into consideration, had to be followed. Number one, don't wind up on your back, because you take a look at the Spartan spear. You had a lizard sticker on one end, and the long point on the other end. They have two, very few armies had spears with double ends, so where one they would use for front, and the other one they used to bang, to spear the guy on the ground, to finish him off, anybody that they were stepping over. So imagine now being on the ground, pulling guard with somebody, you're in the midst of a bunch of people fighting, swords, this, that, going bananas, still spears in the hand, and you're on the ground next to your buddy who is who's mounted on top of another guy, and the guy, or you're on the ground and your opponent is on top of you. His buddy looks at you and just goes clack, nails you right in the mouth. You know, these guys they weren't looking for the heart, whatever. I mean, when they came down with swords, they came down on the face because they know, and you can relate it somehow today to, in the same respect to the Filipino martial arts, whereas they go by protocol of, a priority of targets. Number one is the knife hand, right? The weapon hand. Second is the face, because the face creates a lot of psychological, not just physiological, physical damage, but psychological trauma. So most of these were going right into the face, into the eye, into the neck, into the throat, and, all frontal. I mean, the last thing you'd want, because everything over here was covered up, right? And a lot of guys would get stabbed on the side and on the legs, like most of them did, they'd get cut by their own shields on the thighs. And some guys would get slashed in in their thighs, in their arms. They still fought. They were able to bypass that pain. Seriously, we're talking about severe pain here. Gashes opened up where most people today are in complete shock. Why? Because we're not trained that way psychologically to bypass the pain or the initial shock of the cut. Our brain goes directly to the wound itself, hence taking away the focus of the immediate threat that's on us. And now we've succumbed to it because it's not the pain of the gash that's gotten to us, because usually endorphins kick in and, you really don't feel the pain, especially a slash. You just don't feel it. Most people, I mean, when they bleed out, they pass out because they're bleeding out, whether internally or externally. It's not because of the pain itself. The pain comes in afterwards. The body, adjusts to the pain. They knew this back then. They understood it. So, the fact that they were able to bypass these pain levels was huge. So obviously the face was one. So pulling guard on a guy, on an opponent, to get down and try, I don't know what, arm bar him or front choke him or whatever, was absolutely unheard of, So their instincts and reflexes were completely different. Now, were they able to fight off their backs? Absolutely. That's a given fact. That is known. It's already been documented. The thing, and going back to the pain elements, that because they were mano a mano, everything was mano a mano back then. These were elements of fighting that they needed to be able to deal with regularly. Pain was the ultimate. I mean, taking a shot, is ultimate. Hence why, any good martial arts school, you have to have contact in there, because in reality, a guy comes up to you, or a bully for your kids at school, this and that, first shot in the mouth or in the face, in the stomach, and impact plays a major physiological and psychological role, right? So you have to be able to deal with it, and there are ways for the body to deal with it, as has been proven on in history. So the psychology back then of the fighter, and I'm going to stick with the Spartans, because they mastered it to the T, is that number one, they needed to acquire control of their brain, and hence why they say, mind over matter type of thing. And I remember years ago a guy asking, what, I don't understand what this mind over matter is. It was the ability for your brain to control control the rest of you, right? So for example, going back to ancient Greece, let's say in the middle of a fight, a Spartan gets cut. He'll feel the initial cut, but he'll have to move on. He's been trained to refocus immediately, instinctively, on the threat in front of him and deal with the cut, wherever it was, afterwards. So because they dealt on a mano-a-mano base, they needed to progress in that area where they can deal with the various strikes and pains that came in with the package. Now, don't forget, today, if you're looking at the military, people are hiding behind walls, hiding behind barriers, and taking shots at each other from far. It's a different psychology. Hand-to-hand combat is almost secondary, and I'd say, if we equate it to what they used to do back in the day, I mean, very, very thin. And there's, today, I mean, I look at some of the stuff that's out there, and it's almost questionable. Why would, somebody be teaching the military this, which is almost sport-oriented, as opposed to, this, which was happening in the ancient times? Because what was happening in the ancient times prepared them psychologically. Today, I mean, I'm not comparing a gash, a slice with a, with the trauma of a 7.62, a bullet or an armor-piercing projectile coming in, which causes incredible pain, or IEDs or whatever. We're not talking about that, but a gash was still a gash back then, and psychologically they were trained to deal with that. Spartans, or people back, warriors in that at that time would would wind up with massive cuts, on their face or on their arms, because their arms were exposed. I mean, except for the forearm greaves that they had, and the rest of their arms were exposed. Um, their thighs were exposed also, except for the shin guards, that they had, the shin greaves. They knew what they were doing back then. I mean, we haven't changed that much in terms of protection. So, because they would come from high to low and they would chop from high to low, with the swords. So they would take the legs out. Why? Because, well, you take a guy's leg out, he's down, he's finished. So they understood the war game. And hence it gave him a greater edge in terms of the mano a mano fight, the mano a mano deal. Now, why would an ancient Pankratiast, why I believe an ancient Pankratiast would take out a modern day top tier MMA guy? Many, many reasons. Number one, they train with no rules. So you have a guy, although we touched on it last time, we kind of we breezed by it. But I want to give it a more in-depth understanding and in detail. Well, first of all, when you're dealing with, to them it was only logical that they didn't even consider the fact it would be an anomaly to say, well, he's heavier than me. They didn't even consider that, because you don't choose the enemy. So a guy of, let's say, 185 pounds would be dealing with guys of 230 pounds. Here, guys are fighting. Guys are, squabbling over, well, he's 10 pounds heavier, or he's 5 pounds heavier, or he couldn't make weight 5 pounds less. And this is becoming like massive, major problems, in the sport arena. And you can say, well, that's based on the boxing commission ruling and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but still people are arguing over this, not all, but a lot of them are. You can get some brave individuals that say, hey, listen, man, I don't care what weight. Well, let's do it anyways, I give more credit to those people, and the other one's kind of like hiding behind the weight, And I have to give credit to McGregor for that, because McGregor, he's fought in different weight categories, and, he doesn't mind. To me, that's a warrior, Do I agree with the way that he speaks in terms of marketing? He's fantastic. As far as the face of martial arts, I'm not, I have my reservations about that, because for me, martial arts was about, humility. To me, martial arts, ambassadors of the martial arts out there are guys like, without a doubt, the way that you express yourself, the way, strength is through humility. And that's Randy Couture and Boss Rutten. For me, I mean, this is the examples of what a martial artist is. I mean, to commend people like that, and, to hold as massive, great role models, as to what a martial artist should be like, and Randy, for a completely different reason, because he came out of a wrestling background. I mean, he's got a base, he's got a reflex, and he reoriented, he reorganized his tactics, having, gotten his kicking in, his punching in, and acclimated himself into that environment, which is very hard to do, and became champion and his UFC Hall of Famer. So that is exemplary. That's a mind that constantly learns, that doesn't stop learning. So that's, to me, another example of what a Pankratiast is about, the way people speak. Now, going back to that, the differences. So weight category would be one. There was no weight category. So another thing is, mostly everybody, except for the Spartans, which added every other tactic in there in a very methodical way. I mean, you're not just going to bite somebody or eye gouge somebody for no reason. You're doing it for an effect. You're trying to create an effect. But generally, everybody was taught equally. It was unheard of that somebody who would come into a tournament and be lacking something. I mean, they would consider it, unacceptable. They'd say, well, this guy doesn't know half of his whatever. He wouldn't be able to handle himself on the ground, or he wouldn't be able. He doesn't have the kicking ability or the punching ability or whatever. He's not a Pankratiast. Hence why no wrestlers would, or boxers would engage in Pankration tournaments. Yet Pankratiasts would engage in wrestling and Pankration and boxing tournaments within the games and come out winners, and those are documented down. So it's nothing. It's not like as if it's we're taking guesswork here. The Greeks documented everything down, and I stand by my statement when I say there is no other race that has you know brought that, given so much documentation and literature down through the ages as the ancient Greeks, and they've documented almost everything down. And considering the burning of the Library of Alexandria, there's a lot that has been lost, and yet imagine still how much is out there. So the fact that a 185-pound guy is fighting against like I said, my ADD kicks in, right? So I go back and forth, but I still come back to the original topic. So bear with me, right? Going back to saying, well, you get a 185-pound guy, and then you get, let's say, a 250-pound guy. Obviously, you're looking at, and this is one of the issues, one of the posts, and I found it very petty, to say that it only goes to show the level of ignorance of a person is, well, you take a guy today, they're heavier, they're stronger, they're this and that. Well, just because they're taking steroids doesn't make them more skillful, There's still adverse effects to taking steroids in terms of cardiovascular and everything else. So it doesn't make the fighter. In terms of performance enhancement, back then, the Spartans were known to take khat, K-H-A-T, that came from Africa, and that was a stimulant to help them to keep them awake. It was like a caffeine thing, but it was much higher. It was a stimulant to keep them aware and up. It didn't give them extra strength, and this is what the Africans gave and still give today, and still exist in Africa today, where they give their miners to just keep working and working and working, in the minefields. So when they're mining for diamonds or whatever other minerals, and that's what they took. That's basically what they took. And then another thing they did take was tribulus, which is Tribulus terrestris, which used to grow in ancient Greece. I don't know if it still grows anymore, but I know today they get more or less the Bulgarian one, which is you have to find an organic one if you can find, and most of it is not organic. It's very synthetic, so it still plays within your system also. And that's what they gave to boost testosterone production. It wasn't artificial in order to gain more muscle, because they knew back then, and you take a look at the mosaics, artists were known back then. I mean, like, we can pick on topics all day long, from the artists to the philosophers to whatever, but artists back then drew what they saw. And you can see the defined bodies on these guys. They were massive. They were massive and they trained. They trained with weights, and they trained specific with weights. And they trained very heavy with weights. They were known to be very fast, very powerful, and extremely lethal strikers. So now, as far as performance enhancement, they were big, but they didn't need to be massive, extremely massive, because that just slowed them down. The bigger you are, gravity just takes you down. Now, you can give me examples like, well, you take an NFL running back, or that can run like the refrigerator back from the Chicago Cubs, right? And just Chicago Bears, and just gun from one side to the other, a 300-pound guy, or Peyton, or these guys. I mean, they were just massively fast, and they were huge, but they were also known for performance enhancement also too. So every single one of them has done artificial performance enhancement. But you put them in an arena where they got to fight, it's a completely different game. Now you have the entire body going at it, up and down, pulling, pushing, kicking, striking, this, that. The heart is just pumping. So gravity starts weighing you down. The more you weigh, the heavier the more it weighs on your system, on your heart and on your lungs. So everything plays a role. Now they knew that, they needed to reach a particular level. Now the guys that were 250 pounds, it wasn't guys who were 180 and decided to take performance enhancement and build themselves up to 180, 250, so that they can beat the little guy. That was unheard of back then. First of all, anybody cheating back in the games, they would make statues of these guys. Statues, and put them up there and say, this guy was caught cheating, yada, yada, whatever. Okay? So they were very, very adamant about their athletics. They wanted to see pure athletics. Hence why even in ancient Rome, when the Romans came in, and until the Romans came in, the Olympics were only privy to the Greeks. When the Romans came in, the Roman Empire expanded outwards. The Roman Pankratiasts, were how many Roman Pankratiasts were thrown into the gladiators and refused to fight as gladiators because they were so well educated, these Roman Pankratiasts, as well as the Greeks, because they were taught by the Greeks, whether it be the Macedonians, Athenians, or whoever else, or Spartans, whatever. They were educated and cultured within the Greeks, and they understood that pankration, being an unarmed sport and then an armed sport, was about the abilities of what you are capable of doing with your body, with what you were given with at birth. That was the skill. That's skill, first and foremost. And we'll get into other examples of that later on, how it pertains to armed and in comparison to armed and unarmed. So a lot of these guys who refused to fight as gladiators were executed, the Roman Pankratiasts back then. And every one of them, well, there was a lot of them that documented, that did refuse to fight in the gladiator games because they considered it barbaric, using pitchforks and spears and swords and this and that. And, there was no culture to it. Not only was there no culture, there was no skill to it. Like I said, the minute you put in one weapon, you might as well put in a whole bunch of weapons. It takes, it changes the playing field. So pankration being an unarmed sport, it taught you how to be able to win through a scenario, a battlefield scenario with, after having lost your weapons. So taking the weight category, going back to the weight category, the ancient Greek Pankratiasts were all schooled basically the same. So they were excellent strikers, excellent grapplers. They knew how to throw, they knew how to submit, and they knew how to create an effect using their various weapons and positioning once they've locked in, like the typical Pankration statue that I did for Museum Secrets, the documentary of the wrestlers, which is actually should be called Pankratiasts, right? And that statue in itself is also a main statue in the garden of in Switzerland of the FILA headquarters, which kind of surprises me why they haven't even commemorated to even attempt to put pankration back in to the Olympics. But that in itself is a separate topic. So the weight category, forced the little guy and the big guy to use different tactics and strategies. Now, don't forget, there was only three. There was no eye gouging, no biting, and no fish hooking. Pulling from the side of the inside the mouth with your finger and pulling out. Those have effects, right? So, but everything else was allowed. You were allowed to elbow to the temple, elbow to the cervical spine, elbow to the throat, strike to the throat, strike to the cervical spine, strike to the temple, smack into the joints, small joint breaks, manipulations. Everything was allowed. You were allowed to hit anywhere on the spine. You're allowed to punch into the groin, kick into the groin, knee into the groin. You're allowed to hit every part of the body. Hence, these guys needed to be able to defend against these. So if the eye gouging and the biting wasn't enough, well, now a guy had to defend himself against getting punched into the throat or into the side of the neck or into the back of the neck. Now you take a look at some of the mosaics where guys punching. They're not punching, in the back of the skull. They'd be punching on the side of the face or on the back of the neck, or on the side of the body. So everything else was allowed. And because everything else was allowed, you had to be able to defend yourself against that. And you had to position yourself properly to be able to defend against these openings. So if a smaller guy did get caught by a bigger guy on the bottom, he was in trouble. And he was in huge trouble. So it allowed for these guys to learn how to maneuver and footwork and work the in and out, and catch a bigger guy in a better position. Obviously, there were no time limits there either. But it wasn't, they also weren't allowed too much room to move around, So, there was a referee there, and anything that was illegal, the referee, the Elanodikis, that's what they were called back then, Elanodikis, they had a stick that they would be beating on the guys because these guys were so engaged, in the heat of the moment that they wouldn't feel anything. So they had to be whipped, when an illegal move was being done. So now you have the weight category, whereas these guys are forced now to be able to maneuver against a heavier guy, or the heavier guy work against a much lighter guy who was known for his own particular tactics that the bigger guy had to defend against. Now, everybody had his own little techniques, but everybody was schooled the same practically. That's the difference. It's not like the first UFC where I think if our ancestors were allowed to see just the first one, they'd consider it a travesty. Why? Well, for our generation, it kind of like said which style is better than the other, but that's almost an oxymoron. No style was better than anyone else. I mean, the Gracies, who I admire very much, came in there and understood that unless a guy knew what to do on the ground, they were basically useless once they were taken down there. Once you smothered them, put them down, sat there, that was it. You choked them, you armbarred them, you whatever. It was done. But then once the strikers started learning how to defend against that and how to grapple, the game changed. So here we go. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just coming back a full circle. And we're getting to the full circle again now. We haven't come directly to the full circle, although we have some really interesting guys today that I can consider. We're going back right to pankration, right? There's no such thing as MMA. This is pankration. So, and just because there's a lot of rules, it's still pankration, meaning, everything is involved. From the striking to the grappling, fists, elbows, knees, kicks, your strangleholds, locks, whatever. So, and that's what they meant by pankration back in the ancient days, although they added a bit more into it. The interpretation is much more wider. So, everybody had his own technique back then, but everybody was well schooled. Whereas the first UFC tournament, and there was no rule, there's basic pankration rules, no eye gouging, no biting. But you weren't allowed to hit to the neck. You weren't allowed to hit to the throat. You weren't allowed to hit to hit the back of the cervical spine or on the spine. But you were allowed to kick into the groin. You weren't allowed, I think, to hit into the joints or smash into the knees or stuff like that. But there was nobody that was equally skilled. So it was really a test of who had, not more skill. It was whichever system had the mechanisms, the appropriate mechanisms to take on the other weaker or a system that lacked those mechanisms. So every one of these systems lacked everything. Hence why we're forced today, to have so many, to more or less evolve into, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, this, that. And even that in itself, a lot of guys, which we'll discuss at a completely different time, the reflexes and reactions are not all there. So these guys were taught to be able to, because everybody, they knew their environment, they knew what was involved, so everybody was equally trained. But everybody had their own specifics because there was different weight categories, different sizes. You'd have a guy that was 5'4" and a guy who was 6'3". Maybe the same weight, maybe not. But that in itself is a completely different dynamic. So they had to work accordingly. The taller guy would try to avoid having the little guy come in and take the rear. And a lot of these guys were known on taking the side, the rear, suplex, take him down, and then start beating on him. There's a reason, there was an effect and a reflex that would happen there. They weren't trying to go for the submission. What they wanted to do was soften the guy up before they went for the submission. It was, how am I going to take the guy out? So in terms of size, we haven't gotten any bigger. Yeah, we have gotten bigger today, but that's thanks to the steroids. You can call it PEDs, you can call it testosterone replacement treatment, TRT. It's steroids, man. If you're taking a 28-year-old, 30-year-old that's screaming, I was on TRT, this and that. I mean, we're done as a society when we start using steroids and trying to find excuses to use them. Like, I've got serious testosterone depletion, so that's why my wife is not having sex with me because of that reason. So I need TRT in order to, for me to be able to make, the next fight. I'm glad that they're literally, they're coming down on that very heavily. And I agree with GSP and the others that are opposed to it. George St. Pierre, by the way, who was vehemently opposed to it, because you're fighting guys, you're on TRT, man, and you've got completely different strength up there. So it is more dangerous, but then you're not you. It's not you 100%. You're employing a completely different chemical running through your system that brings out other, that kicks in the mechanism, the turbo drive in your system to be able to, to punch a little harder, to kick a little to kick a little harder, to squeeze a little stronger, and, to move a little faster. Now, a skilled fighter will still be able to, run around that if he's got good strategy. But to answer the question of the other guy that said, well, guys today are bigger and strong. No, they're not. If anything, we've become weaker. We become weaker, and we're using stuff to replace our natural strength and the ability for us to build natural skill and rely on skill as well as strength, at what they did back then. So in that perspective, we've got absolutely nothing on these guys. Second, the way they trained. Pankratiasts today, let's go over to the MMA group. Let's go to today's fighters. Hands are wrapped. Boxing gloves. Bag gloves. Pad gloves. I mean, our hands, shins. I mean, companies are coming out with shin guards that are the size of mattresses. I mean, the only thing we don't have on, jock protectors that are, the only thing we don't have on is massive diapers. That's the only thing they don't have on. A lot of them also employing, thigh protectors now. Headgear, which of course, does keep a person safe today. We are living in a completely different society, but this is not the point. The case here is who was tougher, and how would a top tier MMA guy today, veer against a top tier ancient Pankratiast. So we have guys with headgear today, bag gloves, pad gloves, boxing gloves, 16 ounces, 14 ounces, executive sizes for when they're sparring, which I use as well. Because I don't feel like getting punched in the mouth every time. I mean, gone are the days where we sit there with the, heavily clothed, padded gloves, or the Bruce Lee gloves. We'd be taking shots in the mouth, and but we were a different time also, and it was a lot tougher back then. It was my generation was a lot more tougher than I think what today's generation is, and so we were a little rougher. The streets were rougher too, so you were forced to get into it because there's a lot of tough guys out there back then, especially during the craze of the martial arts. So you have so much wrapping and so much protection that the body itself isn't capable of protecting itself. And hence why I say at my school, I never enforce the wrap around. We become so fragile today that we've taught our bodies that unless it's being protected by something, it's going to get hurt. And if you study the ancient approach of the real warriors, these guys had a method by which they used in order to develop strength for the body. The body will strengthen itself, will compensate for the stresses introduced to it, right? So it'll compensate for whatever stress implied onto the musculoskeletal system. Now, you can't shock your body by, going up into, we use logs, we use sandbags at the school always. We've always used logs. We've always used sandbags. Heavy sandbags. I had special sandbags made by a buddy of mine who has a martial arts sports manufacturing company. And I had specific bags made which are like columns. And I can vary the type of mixture inside there to give it the type of consistency I wanted. But when it was all sand, which it is all sand, both of them are, they're like columns, so... which I give credit more to the Thai boxers who, will sit there and bang against those old bags that used to sit on the bottom with, I think they used to use sawdust and glue and sand, and mix together or something like that. It was like a bowling ball that you were hitting on the bottom, That was the only way to do it. Now, there is an approach to strengthening these joints and bones and the body in itself in order to be able to, to fortify the bones, the joints, the tendons, the ligaments, the muscles, so that it can handle the impact you are going to distribute, that you're going to impose on, right? So it's not just to take the other guy's shot. And I imagine these guys have to take the other guy's shot. So the MMA guys today are hitting, they got every piece of equipment you can possibly think out there. So their wrists, for example, on the wraps is being held together by the wrap. When you go into, and I have issues in terms of the gloves that they're using today, hence why so much concussion with, obviously there's more concussion in boxing than there is in MMA, but there's more and more concussions coming out in MMA that they're not actually saying, but there are more that'll be coming out, out into the that'll be surfacing out there because more and more guys are doing it, and less guys are sparring because of the type of the concussions they're getting. And I think it's because of the fact that, and our boxers used to use wraps in the ancient days, only the boxers, not the Pankratiasts, only the boxers. There's no known Pankratiast using wrapping his hands. He needed to grab this, that, whatever. Boxers didn't need to grab, so they had them. And it was more not to protect the knuckle, but to protect the skin from constantly being cut, or from hitting teeth. Basically, that's what was it. That's what it was about. So, when you put a wrap, when you're wrapping your arm, your wrist, your hand, your wrist is dependent. Okay, the stability of the wrist is dependent on the wrap. Now, I don't use wraps in the school. I don't enforce them. I don't recommend them. By today's standards, I give people the option. If you want to use gloves, you can use gloves, and I do use gloves, so they are only on my pads, so they don't wreck my pads. Obviously, no shoes on. There is no shoes anytime they're hitting a bag or a pad or whatever. But I don't advise to have them to have their hands wrapped, because it allows, upon impact, for the fist, the wrist itself, to strengthen itself. Now, you can't have a strong wrist if it's never taught to be strong upon impact. So, and I remember as a doorman having to defend myself against others and taking a shot. And I remember on a couple of occasions where I've gone on a 1-2, and the guy dropped after my first and my second one. The guy was on the way down, and my second one hit the wall behind. Carpeted the wall nonetheless, but still hit the wall at full force. If my knuckles weren't already built and my wrists weren't already tightened, because of the never being wrapped, and the only time I wrapped them was when I was doing boxing. But thank God it was kind of like balanced out with the martial arts that I was doing in the karate and the other systems, which was no wrapping. It was just on hard surfaces, which I took to a more extreme use. Although the Japanese are a little too extreme off the bat, and they create a lot of damage into the bones, which show up later on in terms of arthritis and so on. There is a way of fortifying the body, as has been documented in the ancient Greeks, where you don't need gloves, you don't need any protective equipment. Now, because the guys are using that today, you see a lot of guys, their hands are broken. And in MMA, in the fights, they'll have their hands not just they'll have their knuckles wrapped. Super tight, almost like like a hammer. And then they'll put the small glove over it. Now you got a hammer up there, but the knuckles are still being protected and wrapped by the wrapping itself. There was none of that in ancient Greece. Today they go into the gym, they put on their wraps, put on the glove, start hitting the pads. If I don't feel my knuckles on the bag, I don't feel it. It's not giving the same sensory to the brain. I need to feel my knuckles hitting it, so hence it tells the body tighten. Tells my fist, my brain will tell my fist tighten. That impact, that surface, will tell my fist tighten upon it. Now, and this is for another episode, but eventually with time, what it does is it teaches the body to tighten immensely upon impact. Stay loose before, and then upon the impact, it tightens. And it teaches the ligaments and the tendons on the wrist and the little bones up over here and the knuckles included, to tighten up and to strengthen. The body reinforces it, recalcifies it. The arm has been taught to keep its position. And even when I'm hooking and I'm kind of like digging in a little bit, it's still being done with support. The wrist is supporting itself. So when you have so many things happening today, and you take a look at how many shin breaks are out there, well, how can they not be? You can attribute that to diet or condition or whatever, but I don't see not too many Taiwanese, at least the old guys, shins breaking, because they have a particular method for it. Problem is with MMA guys is they do very little of something, of everything, and they try to expand it outwards, that they don't get enough of it. Hence why you get a lot of Thai boxers like Bakao and some other guys, and Shirisha, whatever his name is, with massive strength on their shins, and even the lesser known guys. Why? Because they're still using the old methods to to fix that shin and fix that bone up over here, right? So today, with so much padding that the MMA guys are using, it hasn't done anything to strengthen the weapons that they need to hit with. Hence why I knew so many boxers in my generation, when they would get into a street fight, they would knock the other guy out, but they would shatter their fist at the same time too. So, that's counterproductive. So how do they fare to the old guys? Well, The old Pankratiast used, and today they're using. I mean, like maybe my school. I've got the lightest bag I have is 150 pounds, and most of us don't even touch it. That's for the kids, and even my kids sometimes. Most of my kids don't like it. They go for the heavier ones, and my average bag there is about 400 pounds. 375 to 400 pounds. Very, very dense, very hard to move in. You feel it upon impact. I mean, you're kicking it with your shin and you're feeling it. And this is just material, right? Forget about my sandbags. So the ancient guys had a variety of different type of rock sandbags. They had from regular gravel type bags where, it was made out of pigskin. Most of their bags were made out of pigskin. So when you have gravel type, which are jaggedy, you feel it on the knuckle. You feel it on the knuckle. Then they had the softer rocks, the ones that you find, on the beach, and put them in there, much softer yet hard. I mean, it was smoother, the texture, but it was hard nonetheless. Sandbags, they had no wraps going on for them. They'd be kicking, punching, elbowing, kneeing into these things, head butting, so their body had no other alternative other than to fortify itself. And these guys were known to, literally put their fist through some of these bags. So let's think about that for a second. You work on bags these type of bags for the next 5 years. No softies, no material type. The type that you can barely get no give to it, right? They're just hanging, but no give to it. 300 pounds, just swinging, and you're constantly whacking away at it, pounding and elbowing and pounding and punching and kneeing, and just imagine the amount of power. Forget the speed that a lot of these, and there was known a lot of these guys to literally rip through these bags. Imagine the amount of power developed and what kind of lethal force they would have up against a human body. Now, you take any one of those guys that were training under these type of conditions, and they would be sparring against each other. So that type of force on the body was also forced the body to adapt to being able to take that type of an impact, because there was no gloves. It's the same thing like almost same thing like the guys at in Brazil that were doing old Vale Tudo fights. It would last an hour and a half. No gloves, no nothing. Some of those, the old tapes that you'd see. No gloves, man. Just pounding and pounding in. Once you're taught to be able to do that, it reinforces your body, makes you a lot stronger that way. So these guys were taught to put their fist through, massive bags of rocks and sand at high speeds. And what do you think the impact level would be on a guy today? Given the rules, even with the ruling. Take a shot to the guy, take a shot from a shot in the mouth from a guy like that. I think it would just shatter his entire face, let alone the body. And I imagine a guy on top of you, be it even in your guard, taking shots at you down like that. And don't forget, their strategy was completely different. They weren't there to leg lock you or slide out of the guard. They'd pound the daylights out of you until you gave up that guard, and then they'd slide out and beat the living daylights out of you even more. They valued the level of impact and what impact can do. Hence why the military, will strike first from above, man. Impact power, boom, boom, boom. Shock you mentally, psychologically first, and cause obviously physical damage, and then bring in the troops, type of thing. Impact plays a major role. Hence why a lot of the grapplers in the the first 2-3 UFCs, the jiu-jitsu boys, were having a hard time when some of the top tier strikers were getting their grappling down. Now they had a force to reckon with. Hence, you got guys like Boss Rutten with absolutely immense kicking and punching power, man. Imagine him on top of you taking shots, or even a stand-up. Why? Because there's something to that strike, to create that effect. You want to open up that strategy. You don't want to just be so transparent, and that's what they were about. So today's MMA fighter is reliant on so many mechanisms, so many type of padded equipment, so many safeguards, to protect them. Weight categories. You've got, substance abuse. Let's not even go into the narcotics. substance abuse, performance enhancement, steroids. Let's call it for what it is. Shin pads, type of gloves, headgear, this, that. They would not be able to endure, and the weight categories today. Let's take a look at. Let's use another example, and just to close off a little bit here, because it's a big topic, and I'd like to continue it at another program. Let's imagine now, okay, that you take a look at, for example, polydamas. Polydamas, and a lot of the pankration tournaments today, they honor polydamas with a type of little exhibition, especially the guys in Greece and under the World Pankration Athlema Federation, right? Which I give them credit for, bringing out there, and they're still fighting for, to get it out there into the Olympics, and I give them credit for that. Although there's, we might not agree on certain things, but I do agree on their efforts. They do honor Polydamas. Polydamas was a guy who was a champion Pankratiast. To give you the extent of how trained, how skilled, what kind of skill training they had. They also had skill training with weapons, because it was part of their training. Now, first it was mano a mano, then it was the stick, then it would be the sword. And these guys were amazing with the stick. Amazing with the stick. And how amazing were they? Well, Polydamas was invited to the Persian king's palace, and I forgot which Persian king that was. I'm not sure if it was Xerxes. I think it might have been Xerxes back then. I could be wrong. I'll come back with that. He was invited to, they wanted to honor him. But what they did is they baited him. They set a trap. So they invited him over. They wanted to see who this Olympian, this renowned Olympian was. This guy was massive. He was incredible. I mean, you take a look at him, and he was just, a solid body that can move like lightning. And they wanted to they sent him an invitation wanting to commemorate him and to honor him and have a massive dinner. But what they did is they entrapped him. So as he came into the palace, he expected to see a dinner and an honoring, and the guy and the Persian king turns around and goes, well, I want to see what all this famous, this infamy is about, what this famous, who this famous Polydamas is, and what these skills that are, that people are talking about. So he brought out 3 of his top guys, the Persian king, immortals, 3 of his top guys, to fully armed to fight against Polydamas, and they gave Polydamas a stick. Just like they did at Achion with Alexander the Great. They gave him a stick. And Polydamas killed all 3 of them with a stick. Now you have to ask yourself, what kind of maneuverability did this guy have? The ability to move strategically, stay outside of the box, deal with 3 guys fully armed coming in with swords. I mean, that in itself, it begs, many, 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 many hours of thought. You've got to sit there and literally try to fathom what it must have been like for this guy. How did he wave that stick? I mean, today we look at most Filipino martial arts practitioners, and they can move with a stick. I mean, really, really well. So we try to equate it to that. Only this guy's fighting against swords. 3 guys on his own, naked. I think he had maybe a loincloth on. And he killed all 3 of them. The king literally flipped. And till today, we honor that. So who are these guys that didn't say no and said, hey, wait a minute, man. I didn't come over here, so I can sit and fight 3 guys. I came here for a dinner. The guy just said, okay. That's how confident this guy was. Why? Because he was true to his training. He didn't pamper his arms, didn't pamper his legs, didn't do anything. They stayed right up there to, true to reality. You can't go wrong with that. So confidence is built by knowing that if I take a shot on somebody when I have to defend myself, my fist is not going to give out on me. My leg's not going to give out on me. My wrist will not give out on me. Neither will my knees, and neither will my jaw. So in order for me to do that, I have to train in such a way for them to be there for me. to be strong, to be fortified, to support my tactics, or else I break my fist, all of a sudden it shows in my eyes. And I've seen that happen so many times with other guys, you know? So this guy stood there and beat the living daylights and killed all three of them. Now, you take a look at today's MMA fighter. Put a put a sword on somebody. One guy. Put a sword on somebody. Put a sword on anybody. Take a guy who knows how to use a sword. Take a Filipino martial artist. Take any one of the Dog Brothers. And those are the guys that I admire the most, because, you know, I've had the opportunity to, you know, to call a good friend of mine, Philip Jelina, who I originally started my stick and knife training years ago, early 80s, with the original, one of the original Dog Brothers, Sled Dog, Philip Jelina. And you take a look at the way that they fight, and I say, put one of these guys up against any top tier guy today. Put a sword in his hand. And if this guy doesn't become, the MMA guy, doesn't become the world's fastest runner, make Usain Bolt look like a dead turtle with a broken leg with asthma. I mean, you know, I'm just going to quit the business. Because they're not trained psychologically to be able to have that type of confidence within their sport, within their skill, to say, okay, no problem. Whereas they did back then. So now, if we employ so many rules that we eliminate a particular person's skills, then, you know, you can take a baby and beat a Pankratiast by that token in itself. So, in essence, we don't amount to any, you know, to what these guys were back then. And we don't, because their training methods were just so real and so harsh and so, and, you know, even though at the school today we do employ a lot of them, especially the bag work and the way that we work 2-on-2, you know, I mean, in the end, a lot looks identical, you know, with what the end result might look like, but it's in the training that, you know, we kind of like separate ourselves from. So I wanted to clear that up, and on the next show, I'd like to be able to I'd like to touch on the topic of pankration in the Olympics and what it would take to get in there. I mean, it's a massive conversation in itself, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned over here. You know, women did practice pankration back in the days as well. Also, you know, when the Spartan military, just to kind of like end with this, the Spartan military would leave. The majority of them would go out for war. Sparta was never invaded, not because there was a military left behind, but because it was, you know, whoever was coming in would have to deal with the women and the children. And when I'm talking children, we're talking about not 7-year-olds, we're talking about the 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17, up until 18 years old, because you weren't allowed to go into war until you were 19 years old. I think it was about 19 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I could be corrected. If anybody out there knows, you can correct me, but I don't think so. It's about 18 or 19 years old, you were up in battle. Okay? Up until 17, 18 years old, you were still training. These people were left behind. These guys, a 14-year-old was a man killer. Any 14-year-old Pankratiast back in the day could take on at least 2-3 guys, 2-3 of any other type of guys with a sword and shield. So this is who they were left behind to guard the city, the boys and the women, the girls and the women, who always trained. Because don't forget, Leonidas, when he left for Thermopylae, his wife asked him, "What if you don't come back?" And here's the key words, man, and you gotta appreciate this, because this little hint says everything about what they were doing back then. He turns around, he goes to her, "Continue training," not train, continue training. She was in training. "Continue training, marry a good Spartan, and give birth and raise good Spartan children." That's what he said. So, in closing, I'd like to say Christmas is coming up. We've got a couple of weeks before then, and we have quite a few things happening at the Academy on December 23rd. For those that are in the area, you can drop in and we're having our annual Christmas party. And it's a party that it brings the community close together again. We also raise during this time of the year. and I wish we could do it more, and we will make a point of doing it more often. We raise a lot of our school has been raising a lot of toys for the sick kids and the kids that come into the emergency room at the Montreal Children's Hospital. They lack a lot of toys, so it would be a pleasure to have you guys to come by on the 23rd of December. It's a Friday, from 6 to 9:30. Come and enjoy a couple of, come and have a drink with us. There'll be food there. The beauty about our parties is the mothers get together. We have so many beautiful cultures that are in there, from most of the Middle East to all of Europe, to North America, from French to Armenians to Greeks to Italians to Arabs to Syrians to Armenians to name it. We've got everybody in there. We have the taste of the the taste of the globe there. So come in and try our little food. The only thing I ask of you is that you bring in a little toy, no more than about $15-$20, unwrapped with a little card on top, saying wishing you well, over the holidays, and I hope you get better. Most of these toys do go for the terminally ill kids that are at the hospital. This is for the Montreal Children's Hospital, and we do that every year. From 6 to 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. We do that also. For those that have kids and want them to spend an interesting summer, an interesting Christmas camp, I've got a Christmas camp going on from the 27th to the 30th, and then from the 2nd to the 5th of January. So come in, bring your kids, give me a buzz on. Knock me up on Facebook or on my website, and the website will be in the links below. And if you're in the area and interested and curious to see what we do at the school, come to 1500 Curie Labelle. It's in Laval. I'm offering 1 week free for anybody that wants to come in and try it, and we hope to see you there. So, in closing, as we say at the school, take life into your own hands before it slips through your fingers, and man, it'll slip fast. Until next time, this is Aris Makris, and I do want to thank our sponsors, which is ARMAK Pankration and Gold Silver Investments. So until next time, catch you soon and be safe.